Alexander, they were that noise. Na, you should sleep. I must be hearing things. Hear music.
Quiet. It is polka.
Maybe it is Aurelius.
Na. It is something fireworks. It is Tiffins.
Ei sille polkalle vertailee. Sen kanssa on vaikka Mieron tie. Säkkijärven polkkaa. Siinä on liplatuslaineitten. Siinä on huujunta honkien. Karjala soi, kaikki tietää sen. Säkkijärven polkkaa.
Despite the humorous introduction to this video, I want to help you enter the perspective of a Finnish countryman during World War II to help you understand the importance of this war to them and the pride associated with this battle. Imagine for a moment your country and your family. Imagine today being told that today you shall take up arms against a force that outnumbers you 3-1, and their invasion will be at any time. Your country pissed off this country years ago, as you made them the laughingstock of the world. They are now angry and want to take over your entire country and pillage, despite holding little value other than to make a lesson of you. What do you do to defend yourself? Well, you have some new planes, but the enemy has more. You have anti-tank and air guns, but no ammo. You have manpower, but you have never fought like the enemy, and you are outnumbered. And you have tanks, but they don't stand a chance. These questions were all questions asked by the Finnish people during World War II, and in particular, the Continuation War, where in 1944 millions of Red Army soldiers got back at the Finns after an enormous loss to a country far weaker than them. However, in Finland, every man, woman, and child contributed to the war effort. Men held lines with no training and lack of equipment. Women radioed in messages for multiple days without sleeping, and children prepared to defend their homes against a menace inconceivable to them. Like hopefully any video by me, let's start this explanation with a contextualization. As the first thing you should do in a paper or video on history is contextualize, and set up the backdrop to the magnificent play about to unfold. The Continuation War was after the Winter War in 1939 and 40, where the Soviets failed to annex Finland. Finland would work with Nazi Germany to take land historically claimed by them, but under Soviet rule. This being Karelian Isthmus and other territories, since Finland continued to push into Leningrad alongside the Nazis' efforts to annex Russia. I should add that Finland was not part of the Axis, but was like a puppet ally of the Axis. Nazi Germany would continuously supply Finland for years, including during Operation Barbarossa and during the topic of today. Not to defend Finland's actions whatsoever, but their allegiance to Germany is understandable here. Stalin loathed to pillage Finland, and quite frankly the strongest ally Finland could have was Germany, as obviously nobody hated the Soviets like the Germans did. As the saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So before the Battle of Tali-Ihantala, there was a major invasion by the Soviets to take all of Finland. Stalin was angry about Finland's gain of the Karelian Isthmus and their cooperation with Germans, and basically they wanted revenge. In response, Finland set up a line of defenses all around southern Finland, especially Karelian Isthmus, the most important being the main line, which was made up of skinny trenches with little strategic placements. The VT line was also another line, which was somewhat strong and had good placements, but lacked supplies. And finally there was the VKT line, which was even weaker and closest to Finland's 1940 border, which is very important in this story, as you'll soon find out. Lastly was the older Salpa line, which was defended by blockades and really just a last-ditch effort against a possible Soviet invasion. There really was nothing here. So now that you know the current situation pre-Soviet invasion, let's get into the action. This event is called the Vyborg-Petrozavodsk Offensive. This being respectively the two cities that the Soviet Union wanted to capture in the Finnish gained territory previously. On June 9th, 1944, keeping up with the promise the USSR made in the Tehran Conference, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. This was after the success of Operation Overlord, as the USSR was pressured to carry her own weight and make moves in the east to keep pressure on Germany. I can't really find any information on this, but I do wonder if the Soviets waited 3 days after D-Day just to make sure if the West invasion was a success. Anyways, the Soviet army launched bombing raids on Finnish positions, and the anti-air guns couldn't keep up. The artillery guns also wasted half their ammo by the end of the first day. By the second day, the Soviets had already pushed through the VT line, and thousands of mortars and artillery rounds shattered the weak Finnish lines. By June 20th, Viipuri, aka Vyborg, had fallen into the hands of her once owners, the Soviet Union. Hundreds of deserters went north to the VKT line. VKT line troops told stories of seeing deserters hunched over, walking past, and the VKT line soldiers jokingly waved to them to join up with them. They knew the Soviets were strong, but had to affirm themselves they would hold. The Finnish defense seemed to be crumbling, yet still, many Finns still believed they would hold. To be fair, the Soviets hadn't even reached the 1940 border yet. In the east, the second major city, Petrozavodsk, would soon fall. By June 25th, the Red Army reached the VKT line, and the Battle of Tali-Ihantala would erupt. This is considered by some to be the largest battle in Nordic history, although truly I don't really believe this. With the Finns backed up to their 1940 borders, they knew this may be the beginning of the end, and the Finnish were desperate. Their guns, most being captured Soviet and German hand-me-downs, could not even penetrate the Soviet tanks like the KV-1 or IS-2. However, Germany had offered a plan that would save Finland momentarily. Stick with us and we shall grant troops, tanks, planes, and a large shipment of Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks. Hitler sent the 122nd Infantry Division and the 303rd Assault Gun Brigade, armed with Sturmgeschütz, 3 tank destroyers, as well as the Luftwaffe's detachment Kulmi. This now gave Finland the power it needed to become Stalin's stick in the mud. Now with firepower on the side, the tide of war would shift, and Tali-Ihantala would turn out to be the beginning of the end for the Soviet presence within Finland. The battle for the 2 small villages really began on June 20th, with the exact battle for the towns taking place on June 25th into July. Ihantala saw a larger conflict, however the 2 villages are super close. The Finnish 18th Division and 3rd Brigade, as well as the Swedish-speaking regiment, fought against 2 Soviet corps and a tank brigade. The Finns were initially hit hard by waves of aircraft, artillery, and troops, but managed to solidify and hold out against their stronger counterparts, giving the Finns behind the line time to ready for an attack. Also during this prelude, the Finnish realized the importance of their newly acquired anti-tank weapons, the Panzerfaust and the Panzerschreck, which ripped through tens of tanks. As said previously, these ATU weapons were given by Germany as a part between the pact of the 2 nations. Soldiers told stories of being unable to understand the weapons as the instructions were in German, but eventually the German speakers taught them, and the Finns in some way became more effective with them than the Germans ever had. In the early hours of June 25th, Tali and the surrounding areas were bombed for over an hour by aircraft and artillery. After the attack, the Soviets launched a major offensive into Tali and the surrounding lake, which were holding despite being outnumbered. Eventually, though, the Soviet 27th Tank Division broke through. The 27th Tank Division broke so far through that they risked cutting off multiple divisions of Finnish infantry, which would result in a loss so large that the entire VKT line would crumble, ultimately resulting in a loss for the Finnish. The Finns, however, gathered the 18th, 17th, and 4th Divisions to stage a counterattack against the tanks who spearheaded into the line. They were outgunned and outmanned by a large majority, yet somehow, with the eventual help of Finnish armored divisions, eliminated the powerful 27th Soviet Tank Regiment. The regiment lost all but 6 tanks, and 6 were captured those 6 were captured by Finns. This loss was immense, with tens of tanks being lost. The VKT line was safe for now. After the miracle at Tali, more Finnish units joined, alongside the German 303rd Sturmgeschütz Brigade. After a lack of organization, all VKT Finnish units were fit into 2 groups, the BJ Björkman and the BJ Puruma. The Soviets would also reinforce, including new tank divisions. The Soviets were so bunched up and continued to spearhead east towards Letymyjavi. I probably butchered that. From 3 directions, the Finnish troops attacked the Soviet bulge. The battle groups now got within a kilometer of each other, but couldn't surround the Soviets. Between the 2 groups laid Soviet emplacements at a nearby village. This failure was a major defeat, and if successful, could have saved a lot more Finnish lives. The Soviet artillery and air superiority was still too strong. After the defeat, Finnish bombers and Stukas took to the air, harassing Soviet divisions as payback to their constant air attacks by the enemy. The Finnish troops were now to withdraw to the Vakila, Ihantala, Jarvi, Kukoselka, Nosukiala, Selka line, which is a part of a new branch of the VKT, but they faced too much Soviet harassment. The Finnish troops on the following day would face their worst day, and defeat seemed likely. Finnish forces left Tali hoping to regroup. Every day, 800 plus Finnish troops were lost. However, Finnish artillery would now regroup and cover their allies withdrawing to a safer line. The following artillery strikes by the Finnish would be the heaviest in the country's history. and actually a world record at the time, using General Neonen's tactic, allowing quick movements and changing of targets. Now the battle was for Ihantala, and the Finns managed to destroy the enormous Soviet spearhead. 250 guns rotated on small targets, obliterating entire lines of Soviets, with trees blasting pieces of sharp tree fragments alongside shrapnel into a close-knit Soviet force. The Finns easily corrected their line, and over 122,000 rounds were fired of heavy artillery. This artillery, despite being outnumbered 3-1, saved the Finns from their imminent destruction. Artillerymen years later would continue to be thanked by infantry veterans, as the country and their families would have been dead without the artillery's reign of hell. 2,000 shells were dropped in a target area of 6 hectares in 1 minute, and the rough Finnish terrain forced Soviet armor to cross tight gaps like bridges and roads, and the slowed Soviet forces were easy targets afterwards by Finnish troops carrying the state-of-the-art anti-tank weapons. In one engagement alone, 25 Soviet tanks were lost. The Finns on July 2nd intercepted a Soviet message that they would attack. The Finns sent 80 bombers, half of which were German bombers, and 4,000 artillery rounds towards the preparing Soviets. The Finns now had retaken the VKT, and by July 10th the Soviets sent their best men elsewhere and dug in for good. This time, it was the end of the Finnish and Soviet conflict. This battle resulted in 600 tanks, 320 aircraft, and 27,000 casualties on the Soviet side, and around 7,000 casualties, 3 tanks, and 12 aircraft down on the Finnish side. This was a major victory for the small country, who showed her strength yet again against her Goliath neighbor, this time with no seasons to help them. A ceasefire would follow suit on September 4th, 1944, and the borders would return to their 1940 status. Overall, the Finnish lost land, but more than likely they couldn't afford another invasion, now with Germany losing in mainland Europe. One major Russian historian claims that this was not a real invasion, quote-unquote, and was a scare tactic towards Helsinki. Majority of historians disagree. To me, it seems more like someone was a little butthurt that they lost to a country a little bit smaller than them. I don't doubt the power of the USSR, but I do think they are better off staying out of Finland. And that marks the end of my 3rd video. I hope you enjoyed. This took me 2 days, the longest time yet, and I felt burnt out by the end. Hopefully you didn't notice. Hopefully you learned something new. I really didn't go into deep detail into the actual battle, as records are scarce and really, really biased, even on the Finnish side. But I did try to paint the picture for the later years of the Continuation War, which is a big conflict within World War II. I tried to incorporate humor, but this really was a gruesome battle, and I don't want anyone thinking I'm trying to downplay Finland and the Soviet Union and the horrors both endured. I only did this, quite frankly, to avoid the sadness I get while researching these battles and wars. I actually had an entire video script written on the Sierra Leone Civil War, which was from 1991 to 2003. But it was way too sad for me to make a video on. And yeah, footage was just brutal, and the entire story was brutal. But maybe I will try again. Anyways, hope you enjoyed and learned something new. I will leave you with a closing remark by a Finnish soldier.
Sanoin kavereille siinä, kun
Well, the boys were kind of looking around for drinking water, and I also went looking for a place with water. Well, I managed to find this grenade hole filled with water. There was something else as well. Whatever, I took some of it into my container and said to the boys that you need to boil this water before drinking it. We made a fire and boiled the water. We were there a couple of hours, boiled the water and drank it. But I would no longer drink that water. There was a Russian hero in the same hole. We were that thirsty.